So this week, we've got some genuinely wild headlines. There's news out of South Africa. Archaeologists found Stone Age poisoned arrowheads, and they're way older than anyone thought possible. Then, way down at Patagonia's edge, there's a new national park getting set up at what's basically the end of the map. And woven through all this is this thread about ancient plant poisons, how people thousands of years ago knew things were only just figuring out. So tonight on Spiral Emanations, we're asking, what kinds of dangerous secrets were our ancestors actually trying to lock away? And are those old boundaries that kept them hidden starting to come apart? Hey everyone, and welcome! This is Spiral Emanations, the show where we go digging for the real mysteries behind the headlines. I'm Sky Gracely, and I'm checking in from Los Angeles this week. You know, on top of everything else, we've got the LA Auto Show going on downtown. I was there yesterday, and some of these cars honestly look ready for Area 51 more than the 405. It's that kind of future shock vibe, like half spaceship, half SUV. So, Reese, what's the London update? Anything less extraterrestrial over there?
That depends how you feel about light installations, honestly. I'm Reese Barrows, joining you from London. Canary Wharf's Winter Lights Festival is in full swing, and last night I ended up getting completely turned around in this glowing tunnel maze. They scattered these pop-up sculptures everywhere, and for a minute I thought I was in some kind of art-themed liminal space. Not my usual walk home, but not bad.
Love it. All right, here's what we're diving into tonight. We've got those 60,000-year-old poisoned arrowheads. Yes, 60,000. It's wild. A protected wilderness at the literal end of the world. Legends about boundaries nobody was supposed to cross. And plant science from prehistory that's honestly more advanced than we thought people could manage back then.
That's quite the lineup, Sky. And when you put it all together, it raises this really eerie question. What if there really was some ancient plan to lock away dangerous knowledge, like not just hiding it, but making sure it was out of reach for almost everyone? And maybe, just maybe, those boundaries aren't holding the way they used to.
Yeah, and that whole idea you brought up about ancient people locking away dangerous knowledge, the more I look at the story from South Africa, the more I feel like it's straight out of that playbook. So, get this. A team from Stockholm University, Linnaeus, and University of Johannesburg just found these quartz arrowheads at Umlatuzana rock shelter, and they're about 60,000 years old, which is, you know, seriously next level old for something this advanced.
Seriously. And it's not just that they're ancient, it's what they did with them. The researchers found these arrowheads were actually coated with poison from a plant called gifbol, or the poisonous onion. They identified specific chemicals like bufanadrine and epibufanazine right on the tips. Somebody wasn't just using trial and error here.
That's wild. So this plant, gifbol, it sounds pretty intense, but is it actually as deadly as it sounds?
Oh, it is. Gifbol is one of those plants where you definitely don't want to poke around unless you know exactly what you're doing. It's loaded with these chemicals called alkaloids. Think of them as nature's own set of molecular traps. Even a tiny amount can mess with your nervous system, paralyze you, stop your heart. It's the same kind of logic as snake venom or belladonna, but growing right beneath your feet.
Yikes. So how did people actually pass down something that dangerous without it just getting lost or turning into a disaster? Was there some kind of tradition or secret to keeping everyone safe?
That's the thing. Getting it right wasn't just about trial and error. In most places, the knowledge around plants like gifbol was treated almost like a sacred trust. You didn't just learn how to make poison, you learned the rituals, the timing, even how to handle the roots so you didn't get a dose yourself. It was dangerous knowledge, and everyone knew it. But once you had the process down, you'd have these arrowheads tipped with something that could drop an animal or a person almost instantly, which, in the hands of the right hunter, was as much power as anyone could ever need.
The researchers actually called it advanced planning in their paper, which is kind of amazing. It just shows how much care and thought must have gone into it, and it really connects to this idea of boundaries, like who gets to know what and why. It's not just old news. When you look at what's happening right now at the almost literal end of the world, it hits the same nerve. In Chile, they've just created Cape Froward National Park. The government and this group called Rewilding Chile work together. Reuters just ran a piece on it. It's 370,000 acres, and it's pretty much as far south as you can go without falling into the ocean. You know, I keep seeing rewilding everywhere lately, but I'm not totally clear on what it actually means. Is it just like saving the forest? Or is there more to it?
It's a lot bigger than that, actually. Rewilding isn't just about protecting what's left. It's about restoring places to the way they were before people changed everything. Sometimes that means letting whole landscapes heal on their own. And sometimes it's hands-on, like bringing back animals or plants that disappeared a long time ago.
Like when they brought wolves back to Yellowstone?
Exactly. That's one of the most famous examples. The idea is to put the wild processes back in motion, so forests, rivers, and animals can all shape the land like they used to. It gets pretty wild, sometimes literally. There are projects in Europe trying to bring back ancient forests and even species like bison. And in Patagonia, rewilding can mean giving the land back its original guardians, both animal and human. So it's not just nature, but whole stories coming back to life.
That's actually kind of magic, and it makes me wonder what that looks like in a place as remote as Cape Froward. What's the landscape like now that they're rewilding it?
And at Cape Froward, the place is incredible. Forests, huge peatlands, glaciers, these stretches of wild, rocky coastline. It's not somewhere you just stumble into, and it's become one of the last strongholds for the huemul deer. They're super rare, almost mythical for locals.
I always get this goosebumpy feeling just hearing about peat bogs. Aren't those the kinds of places where you hear stories about people or animals being like frozen in time?
Absolutely. Peat bogs are kind of like nature's secret keepers. Because the ground is cold, acidic, and there's barely any oxygen, anything that ends up there can just stay. There are stories all across Northern Europe of people coming across actual bodies perfectly preserved for thousands of years. Like their skin, hair, even the clothes they were wearing. The swamp keeps it all, as if the land's holding on to a secret.
And some of those bodies are so well preserved, they look like you could just wake them up, right?
Totally. There's the Tolland man in Denmark, Lindo man in England, people who lived and died more than 2,000 years ago, but you can still see the lines on their palms, the stubble on their chins. No one knows exactly what all their stories are. Some might have been ritual sacrifices, others just unlucky travelers. But that sense of secrets hidden in the land, and places where boundaries really matter, you find that in wild places all over the world. It definitely feels like Cape Froward has some of that same energy, you know?
And that sense of hidden history is everywhere out here. The park sits on the ancestral lands of the Kawaskar people. They have these amazing stories about boundaries and guardians at the world's edge, and all these reminders about respecting the limits of where you go. What's really great is the whole park setup is in real partnership with the Kawaskar, so it's protecting their traditions along with the ecosystem.
So, whether we're talking about ancient poisons or wildland at the ends of the earth, it's kind of the same idea. People figuring out how to protect what matters, and sometimes putting up boundaries for reasons that go way deeper than anyone realizes at first. You know, the more we look at these places with boundaries, like actual lines on the land, piles of stones, rare plants growing in a line, the less it feels like it's just about stories. It's like myth is mapped onto the earth in a way you can still literally see if you know where to look.
Yeah, and it's wild because for most of us, those stories are just background noise, just legends, right? But when you think about things like the arrowheads we talked about earlier, you realize people really had to be careful with knowledge like that.
Exactly. And what really stands out for me is the pattern. You see it over and over, across continents and through ages. This thing where dangerous knowledge, like poisons, was kind of protected or kept within trusted hands. It's not just the arrowheads. I mean, in Greek myth, Heracles needed hydra venom to make his arrows really work.
Okay, but that's kind of intense, right? Most people just know him for fighting monsters. I didn't realize he actually took the hydra's poison afterward.
Yeah, exactly. After he took down the hydra, which, by the way, had blood so toxic that just touching it could kill you, he dipped his arrows in the stuff. Suddenly, those arrows weren't just regular weapons. They could take down giants, monsters, even people with just a scratch. That power had a price, though. In the Greek myths, Heracles ended up causing tragedy with those same arrows, sometimes even hurting people he cared about.
So it's like a warning label hidden inside the myth. Unlocking something dangerous can come back to haunt you, even if you're the hero.
Exactly. The Greeks didn't see this as just a cool weapon upgrade. They told it almost as a cautionary tale. Some knowledge is too wild to mess with lightly, and once it's out, there's no way to put it back in the box. And that pattern shows up way beyond Greek myth. Even in the Amazon today, there are hunters whose whole families guard the secret of curare.
I've heard that word before, curare, but honestly, I always pictured it as movie poison, not something families would actually treat like a legacy.
Oh, it's the real deal. Curare isn't just one plant, it's a mix. And knowing which vines, which roots, and how to brew the perfect batch takes real knowledge. In a lot of Amazonian communities, that recipe gets handed down from parent to child, sometimes with rituals, sometimes with warnings. It's not written down, and it's not something outsiders can just pick up by watching.
So it's like an heirloom recipe, except instead of grandma's cookies, it's venom.
Exactly. So if you imagine a jungle family passing down a secret that lets you take down a monkey with a single dart, but could just as easily knock out a person, it makes sense why it's so carefully guarded. And that's just one example. Around the world, you find these secret traditions and rituals, all putting boundaries around powerful or risky knowledge. It's like every culture had its own way of saying, here's the line you don't cross unless you really know what you're doing.
So maybe it's not just a coincidence. It's like everywhere, people were literally drawing lines. Like, who's allowed to know what and who isn't, and which parts of the world you're supposed to stay out of. I never thought of these stories as, instruction manuals for who gets let in on the secret.
That's such a good way of putting it. And sometimes those lines actually do end up in the stories themselves. Like in Aboriginal Australia, the rainbow serpent stories, those are all about the serpent literally shaping the land, carving out rivers and drawing out the boundaries, deciding what's safe and what's forbidden.
I've heard of the rainbow serpent before, but all I really know is the name. What's the deal with those boundaries? Are there actual places people won't go because of that story?
There absolutely are. The rainbow serpent is this ancient, powerful being in Aboriginal Dreamtime stories. Sometimes creator, sometimes more of a guardian or a force to watch out for. The legend goes that as it moved across the land, it created waterholes, rivers, ridges, basically leaving marks everywhere. But, and here's the wild part, those aren't just stories. The places where the serpent was said to travel, they became sacred ground. Sometimes you needed permission or special rituals to even approach. There were, and still are, spots so deeply tied to the rainbow serpent that crossing certain lines without the right knowledge was considered a big danger. Spiritually, and honestly, sometimes physically too.
So it's like the myth actually becomes a rule book for where you can and can't go.
Exactly. And even more, these stories got passed down as kind of living maps, teaching who belonged where, which waterholes to use, and how to respect the land. Some of those boundary markers still exist. There are rivers or rock formations in Australia where local communities can point and say, that's where the rainbow serpent made its path. Here's where you don't cross. It's this amazing overlap of story, territory, and tradition, all tied up together. And what's fascinating is, you see this same kind of thing in so many cultures, where myth and the land work together to draw the lines about what's safe and what isn't.
And that's really similar to what's going on in Patagonia right now, with Cape Froward. The news about the new park, plus the Kawaskar legends about spirit guardians way out at the tip of the continent. It just makes you think, why do all these stories about boundaries and protectors always show up in the most remote, wild spots?
That's such a good point. Even in Patagonia, there's this folklore about giants, these watchers at the end of the world, keeping people out.
When you say giants, are you talking like fairy tale stuff? Or did people really believe there were huge beings out there?
Oh, people absolutely believed it. When Magellan's crew landed there in the early 1500s, they wrote about meeting people twice as tall as a man. Giants roaming the beaches at the world's edge. They even called them Patagonies, and that's actually where the name Patagonia comes from. For ages after that, maps showed southern South America as the land of the giants.
Okay, that's wild. So did explorers just keep running into these giants, or was it more like rumor turning into legend?
A bit of both. Later explorers kept the stories going. Some claim they saw enormous footprints or strange shadows in the fog. Nobody really found concrete proof, but back then, the world felt so big and unknown that the idea of hidden giants didn't seem impossible. And honestly, those stories kept people on their guard, like a warning not to push past those boundaries too lightly. Who knows what was actually out there? And it's interesting, because those old stories about giants and boundaries at the end of the world aren't just myths. They show up in the land itself. You talk to archaeologists, and they'll tell you they're still uncovering old stone cairns. Physical markers, actual piles of rock that line up along boundaries people cared about for hundreds or thousands of years.
Are those the same kind of rock stacks you see out on hiking trails? Or are we talking about something way older and spookier?
Some of the ones you see now are, yeah, but the ancient ones were different. There was a real weight behind them. All across the world, people used to build cairns not just to help folks find their way, but to send a message. This line meant something. In Scotland, they'd stack them to mark clan territory or sacred ground. In Mongolia, there are ovus, towering piles of stones on hilltops that mark the limits of where spirits might roam. And you'd add a rock asking for safe passage or luck when you passed. In the Andes, cairns, called apachetas, were built right on winding mountain passes, sometimes as offerings to mountain spirits, but sometimes as a signal. Don't go beyond this point unless you're meant to.
So it's like, if you come across one by accident, you might be stepping over a line that's been there since basically the dawn of time.
Exactly. It's a whole secret language mapped onto the landscape, sometimes with rocks, sometimes with features that are even harder to spot. Archaeologists still find these ancient cairns marking boundaries of old settlements or forgotten ritual sites. But in other places, the markers can be something totally different. It's kind of amazing. Those warnings or signals sometimes show up in the living landscape too, almost like the land itself remembers where the lines were drawn. And it makes you wonder what signs we might be missing.
And it goes a step further, right? Like, I've heard reports, sometimes in these remote places, you'll find almost a trail of rare plants growing right along those old boundaries. Not just any plants, but ones that you literally don't find anywhere else. If scientists actually took samples or did some genetic testing, there might be something unique, a kind of living clue hiding right in those boundaries.
Yeah, you're right, and that's the part that feels so deliberate to me. I mean, some folks who work in the field have noticed those plant lines, or even things like birds or insects seeming to follow the same routes, almost tracing the same ancient markers. If anyone did a full-on scientific study on that stuff, I'd bet they'd find some really peculiar patterns tying biology to these mythic boundaries.
That actually gives me chills a little bit. Like, what if the boundaries, and even the stories that grew up around them, started off as real warnings? Not just random superstition, but actual practical ways to keep people from crossing into something dangerous.
I think that's possible, honestly. When you start connecting myth and these physical clues, markers left on the land, rare plants, animal paths, it kind of looks like a whole system. Like our ancestors were building a warning network, using both stories and the landscape itself to keep the truly dangerous stuff locked away.
In places like Patagonia and southern Africa, the old local stories, like the Kaweskar legends and southern African traditions, talk about hidden dangers right at the edges or boundaries. Now, researchers in Chile are actually starting to test the DNA and chemicals of plants growing along those ancient borderlines to see if they're really different from just a bit farther out.
And it's not only Chile. Teams in southern Africa are looking for the same kind of thing, checking if rare plants or old artifacts line up with ancient stone markers. With better tools these days, they're finally able to test for these patterns. When you put together the stories, stones, and unusual plant clusters, it starts to look like our ancestors built a whole system to keep something risky locked away. You could almost call these places bio-oblivion vaults, where people used both stone markers and special plants as ancient safeguards.
So just to make sure I get this, you mean there are real places where the land and even the plants could work together, kind of like a combination lock that only certain people could open?
Yeah, exactly. That's what's so wild about this. Technologies like gene sequencing and advanced field surveys are finally letting us catch the clues, both the locks and the codes. But what's really striking is that a lot of times we're uncovering pieces of the puzzle without even realizing what door they actually open.
It really makes me stop and think. When I hear about research teams out at Cape Froward collecting samples from those rare plants along the park's edge, I wonder if we're just learning about the past, or if there's a chance something risky from that past could come back. Maybe some things are hidden for a reason.
Yeah, that's a real possibility. And I think it's smart to be careful. With all the tech we have now, especially with how fast scientists can break down and sequence plant DNA, it wouldn't be hard for somebody to accidentally piece together the formula for a toxin that hasn't surfaced in thousands of years, just by pulling clues from the genetics and chemistry.
It's a reminder that just because we can do something doesn't always mean we should. I think about these wild places and the old stories in a whole new way now. Maybe those old boundaries are about safety as much as tradition.
After everything we've talked about tonight, ancient poisons, boundaries at the edge of the world, I'm honestly going to see parks and old corners in my own neighborhood a little differently now. It's strange to think, but maybe there really is more to those places than we ever realize.
Yeah, it does make you wonder what stories and secrets might still be hidden out there. Thanks for listening, everyone. Stay curious and have a good week.